Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Blon A8 Prometheus. So, if you're watching this channel right now, this is not news to you, but Blon BL-03 kind of took the scene by storm a couple of years ago, and we've kind of been waiting for a suitable follow-up. I think the Blon BL-03 actually, I think it lives up to its hype. Maybe not the best IEM ever, but for people looking for bass at a budget price, it's pretty good. And the A8 Prometheus, it's a next step up in price, but I was interested to see, is it actually the next step up in performance, in sound quality? And so for the past couple of weeks, I've been living with the A8 Prometheus and comparing it to some other IEMs in its price range, which for the record is, I think, $88. So the original Blon was like 30 bucks. This is a few steps up in price, but still, honestly, relatively budget. So that was the premise. I've been listening to these and comparing to some others, including the original Blon BL-03 as well as the Moondrop Aria. So those are the IEMs that we're going to be talking about today. And like my other reviews, this is a live stream. So if you're watching now, you're here live. This is actually, I'm seriously, I can see you right now. But if you have any questions about the Prometheus or any of the other earphones we talk about today, leave them in the live chat. At the end of the review, we'll have a little back and forth conversation, but for now, let's just go ahead and dive into the A8 Prometheus, which, here you go, have it on the table. And I'm going to start by avoiding talking about what this thing looks like, and we'll talk about what comes inside the box. The packaging, pretty simple, nice, simple box. And what you get for 88 bucks it's fine, I think, but it's a fairly Spartan package. You get, of course, a set of tips, and they do give you plenty of different sizes of tips, and they seem pretty decent tips. They're not, the best tips, maybe not the grippiest tips, but they're pretty decent. And then they also include this little carry pouch, which, it's not hard, it's not super protective, but if you're just looking to hold your stuff in place, I think that's actually a pretty usable solution. And then you get the IM on a cable. So let's dive into the cable itself, I guess, actually, which is worth talking about, because the cable that came on the original Blon BL-03 and even the BL-05, which I had checked out at some point, that cable was kind of booty. And this cable, I gotta say, is actually a pretty decent little cable. Let's punch in on that so you can take a look at it up close. It's maybe it's not the best cable, but for an IM under 100 bucks, this is about as good as they get. You got a pretty nice, simple, straight jack 3.5 millimeter termination. You've got a basic wind, but it looks nice. I think it behaves pretty well. It's not especially memory prone. And then you can see that when we rotary wrap it up, it rotary wraps pretty nice. The only minor complaints I'll have about it are, let's say here we do have a chin cinch, but kind of like a lot of other these metallic chin cinches, it just slides around, doesn't stay in place. So I kind of would rather it wasn't there. And then the other minor complaint, and you might see a little bit of this, is that up here near the ear hooks, the cable becomes just one piece of wind, which I'm not complaining about that, but it does seem to be a little bit kinky. And in my time living with it, it hasn't really worn out. So a little bit on the kinky side, but that's a pretty minor complaint for an otherwise pretty nice little cable. And you can see there how well it stacks up. Now that's going to lead us into talking about the earpieces, which I avoided talking about initially because they're kind of distracting looking. If you've never seen these things up close, let me give you a little tour of the shell. In fact, let me go ahead and pop off the cable so we can take a look at this thing in its complete, full, three-dimensional glory, I suppose. I think this thing, well, it seems to be a polarizing look. My opinion is, I think this thing looks really cool. I think it's neat that Blon did something pretty different with the aesthetic and the build quality. Some people might complain that there's like wasted space because obviously the space in between these pieces is not acoustically relevant. The acoustically relevant bit you might not even be able to see, but it's basically right there. But I don't think that matters. That doesn't matter to me at all. Like, I just think it looks cool, and maybe more importantly, it actually fits me pretty well. Let me go ahead and put this thing back together and do a quick fit demonstration. Although, before I do that, maybe worth calling out one small issue that I have is you can kind of see the angle of the 2-pin connectors on here. And when I put that cable on, this is going to contribute to the fit that I'm about to talk about. You can see that the angle that it necessarily takes on is a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little bit aggressive, I suppose. So I'm gonna throw these things in my ears so you can take a look. Sorry, cat A. But yeah, there is the Prometheus inside my ear, and generally I would say it fits pretty small in my ear, despite the fact that it's got wasted space. It fits nice and compact, and I think pretty securely as well. The one thing that was worth talking about is those relatively aggressive ear hooks, the angle on them. It basically just means that the 2-pin connector is kind of running this way, not quite perpendicular. Like you almost expect it to run parallel to my skull, but the 2-pin is actually running a little bit at an angle, so it just means the cable's fighting a little bit, but I didn't really find it to be an issue in long-term wear, certainly not in comfort. Maybe it just made it a little bit less secure than it would have been otherwise, because generally it's a pretty secure fitting IEM. And that's about as much as there is to talk about the build quality. Generally I think it's a pretty attractive IEM, very unique look, and I applaud Blon for doing that. And then fit-wise, it's pretty solid too. So not a lot to complain about when it comes to the build quality. But where does that leave us with the sound quality? And like I typically do, I'll start by just kind of giving you a general overview of the tonality of the Blon A8 Prometheus. And the Prometheus is, unsurprisingly, sort of a V-shaped tune IEM, which means it's got emphasis in the bass, emphasis in the treble, and somewhat recessed mid-range. And there's different ways that you can do a V-shaped signature. You can just kind of have a lot of bass and a lot of treble and really recessed mid-range, just kind of some balance of that. And I would say that the Prometheus, its balance is primarily toward the bass, and that shouldn't be too surprising if you're familiar with the BL-03. But yeah, I would say this is a bass dominant tuning with some treble emphasis and somewhat relaxed vocals. You could call them somewhat recessed vocals. I did find the vocals honestly a little bit on the veiled side, but the treble emphasis that they have here, it's not like an especially forward treble. It's not, I didn't find it, overly sharp or abrasive or anything like that. It was just gives it a nice kind of macro contrasty sound. But again, very, very dominant in the bass. So the things that I like about the sound here on the A8 Prometheus, zoom in for the transition. What I like about it, generally I would say that the Prometheus kind of has a bit of a big, kind of a grandness to the sound. Like it feels big. It's not necessarily a massive staging IEM or anything like that, but I think because of kind of that relaxed upper mid-range a little bit, it just gives that sense of grandness to it. And like I said, it is a contrasty sound, a contrasty V sound without being overly sharp, which is a risk. And honestly, there's just really nothing too offensive about the tune here, or at least especially in the treble region, which a V-shaped signature can have some problems. I didn't think that like vocal tonality was especially wonky or anything like that. Again, I think it's too pulled back and too relaxed for my tastes. Again, I'll give it the nomenclature of being a little bit on the veiled side, but it's not abrasive at all, which is good. Now, what I don't love about the sound here on the Prometheus is honestly that bass. I think there's too much of it. I kind of found the bass a little bit claustrophobic. Both it's kind of big and there's a lot of bass. It becomes pretty domineering in the frequency balance. I found that the bass was, the quality of it as well was a little bit soft and thudding. Maybe it seemed like there was kind of like some bass resonance that just prevents it from hitting really sharp and hard. It's a lot of bass, but I found it frankly pretty much on the muddy side. A side effect of that bass and the relaxed upper mid-range is that I feel like the upper mid-range, or just the mid-range in general in here, resolution is pretty weak. Not very strong on detail, which I think doesn't help out that vocal veil that I was talking about. And then the treble, despite the fact this being, a V-shaped sound signature, and I described it as kind of having a bit of a grand, big sound. It's not especially good at imaging just because it's not super defined. So it's just fairly weak on definition. And I said disintegration because I've got the note here that this is a really good album actually for testing kind of definition, is the Cure's Disintegration album. It's a very busy, full sounding album, and a lot of the songs, if you listen to them on an earphone that has really good resolution, you're still going to be able to pick out the different layering and the separation between the sounds. And if you're listening to it on a set that maybe gets a little bit on the muddy side, it's going to sound like just kind of like this one-dimensional wall of sound. And unfortunately, that's kind of how I feel that the Prometheus does with Disintegration. It did not do that great. So now, that is the A8 Prometheus. I did want to talk about some comparisons with some other IMs, and unfortunately, I actually don't have on hand to compare. So we're going to have to use our imagination and imagine that this is the Blon BL-03, which I do own. I just have it out on loan to somebody, so I don't have it here to show you on camera. And I did spend time directly A/Bing them for this comparison. So in comparison to the original BL-03, which again, I actually quite liked, I would say that the A8 is tonally more contrasty because of that V-tune. The original BL-03 is, you could probably still call it maybe like a mild version of a V-tuning, but it's much more warmer and kind of like mid-bassy and thick, and like, it's just a little bit more mid-range dominant, honestly. And the A8, because it's got more of that mid-range mid-range recession, tonally becomes a little bit more contrasty. Surprisingly, I feel like it doesn't really get any better with definition. In fact, I would say the Blon does a little bit better with definition, or the 03 does better with definition than the Prometheus. So the contrast that you get here is kind of more of the macro contrast, that macro tonal contrast, and less about the micro detail contrast. Tonally, I would say that the BL-03, and again, we're using our imagination, this is the 03. The 03 is a little bit softer tonally, a little bit more relaxed, but the bass actually I feel is tighter and more controlled here. There's, you know, it's maybe a little bit on the thicker side here, but it's actually, I think, better done than the bass here, which just came across a little bit soft, and again, pretty weak in the definition. And yeah, just generally, I kind of found that the bass here on the A8 Prometheus was a little bit strong on sort of that sense of droning. So yeah, we'll pull in our second comparison here, which is the Moondrop aria. Very different tonality here, right? This is, you know, again, a very bassy V-shaped tone, and this is, you know, you could maybe describe this as a bit of a mild V, but this is more of a relaxed, closer to a neutral sound, but still kind of bassy. I think tonally, the aria is much more refined, like it just feels like a more coherent tonality. It is a little bit more forward in the upper mid-range in the vocals, so if you are allergic to that, you might actually prefer the tonality here on the Prometheus, but for my preferences, I think the aria does a much better job. The vocals are more forward, where here, again, they feel a little bit on the recessed side. And because of that, I found that the A8 just came across more laid back. It's got a bit of a warmer mid-range with that, again, kind of claustrophobic bass. I think the details are a lot stronger here on the aria. Not especially like standout details or anything like that, but in comparison to the Prometheus, I did find that the aria was quite a bit better, especially in kind of like the upper treble definition. And I would say if you're just looking for the most amount of bass, the Prometheus will give you the most amount of bass, but I think the quality of bass, this is a lot tighter and less problematic in sort of that droning, bleeding sense into the mid-range. So that's those comparisons, and we'll bring back in our surrogate BL-03 for the next stage of the review, in which I'm going to attempt to rank these in a couple of different categories. So again, this is just my preferences, and these are the categories that seemed important to me. So here we go. So in terms of tonality, again, for my personal preferences, I would say that I prefer the tonality of the aria the best. That would be my favorite. Next would be the BL-03. It's a little bit on the warm side, and a little bit on the thick side, but it does a pretty good job of that, if I'm perfectly honest. And then last place I would say is the Prometheus, which, you know, again, it's not super offensive tonality. It's just a little bit on... It doesn't really have the technical chops to back it up, and because of that, it makes especially that bass droning just really kind of tedious, if I'm perfectly honest. which I guess is going to lead us into talking about bass quality. And in fact, I'll leave these in, I think, the same order. You could probably argue about, which of these two has better bass quality, but personally, I prefer the bass levels of the Aria, and so I'll leave the BL-03, again, our surrogate, in the middle place, and I'll say last place for bass quality. If we're just talking bass quantity, you'd probably say the BL-03 is first, and then this is maybe second, and the Aria is last, but in terms of quality, well, it's not quite how I would do it. And then in terms of technical performance, which is a pretty vague category, but generally I'm going to say that I think the Aria is the top technical performer. The BL-03 is not bad, honestly, for a bassy earphone that it is. It actually does a pretty good job. And then the A8 Prometheus, I feel like technically it's a little bit on the weak side. So those are my thoughts on the Blon BL-A8 Prometheus. How do I want to score it? Out of 5 stars, I'm going to go ahead and give this thing 3 stars. It is, let's take these sounds out of the way to be clear about it. We're rating the Prometheus. It's a decent sounding earphone. Again, I think the aesthetic of this thing is really neat, and the fit and comfort are pretty solid. They really stepped it up in terms of the quality of this cable, which if you think that doesn't matter, we're not friends, but it matters to me. So I like the physical aspects of this earphone. It just comes to when listening to it, it's not for me. It might be for some of you, but for me, it's not for me. Shout out to Keep Hi-Fi for sending this in for review. If you're interested in checking out the BL-A8, of course, I got a link in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this review helpful, please hit the like button. It really does help me out. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Ding the YouTube bell so that YouTube lets you know next time I'm live. And then I'll catch you on the next super review, unless you're here live, in which case, let's hang out and have a chat. All right, let me catch up with live chat. Thank you all for hanging out. First, the shout outs to all the early crew. Big Boss, nice to see you as always. Don Trumpion, what's up? Kaede, good to see you again as well. Precog Vision, how you doing, man? William Mendoka saying, hello, my name's Jeff. Do I take you seriously? Are you William? William or Jeff, which one is it? Or is it both? I go by Mark Ryan, so I'm fine with both. Darren Vicente, good morning from the Philippines. Good morning, how's it going? It is about 5:20 p.m. here in California. Simon himself saying Guten Tag. Guten Tag, I don't know if you're in Germany or whatever, but nice to see you as well. Oh, you're watching at 2 a.m. Maybe it is 2 a.m. in Germany. Would it be? Could be. Dimitri Alvarez, how's it going? Home State, nice to see you. Home State asking for updates on the Moondrop Variations, which is the last IM that I unboxed, and it's probably going to be the next one that I review. Well, I think the review for the Variations is probably going to come maybe at this weekend. That's my hope, and the reason for that is that I really wanted to compare it to the Dunu EST112, and the same person that I loaned my Blon BL-03 to, he's had the EST for a while. It is on the way back, could be here as soon as tomorrow. So then those comparisons will begin. You're probably asking though for kind of an initial impression, and I'll say that I quite like the Variations. I think it's a very good sounding IEM. If you want more detail, there's a lot of it in the Discord chat room. We've got a chat room specifically for the Variations. I'm not going to make you dig through that, but if you want to, dive in and get more detail than what I'm about to say, that's a good place to start. I think the Variations a very good sounding IEM. I think surprisingly the bass, right, when we graphed the frequency response of it, there was a lot of bass, and frankly I was kind of worried about it, especially because of my experience with the The8 Audio Monarch, which I thought was a fine sounding IEM. I just found that it had a little bit too much, quite a bit too much sub bass, and it was kind of distracting. Surprisingly, I haven't had that experience with the Variations. It feels like whatever difference there is in the bass, and on my frequency response comparison, if you want to check them out, they're at squig.link. But in that comparison, if we take that as gospel, and I don't always, but if we take that as gospel, the bass on the Variations is more focused toward the sub bass than it was in the Monarch. The Monarch was a little bit fuller in the mid bass, which I would intuitively say that's actually the tuning I would prefer, is because I feel like the Variations is pretty thin in the lower mid range and in the mid bass. But the effect, and again, I don't know if it's entirely down to those tonal differences or if it's some other character of it, the effect is that I find the Variations bass much better integrated than the sub bass was on the Monarch. So there's that. Fit wise and stuff and comfort, like it's exactly the same as the Moondrop Blessing 2. If there are any differences, I can't tell. And that's from me wearing them for quite a few hours at this point. But yeah, I don't want to say too much more at this point because my opinions are kind of likely to change as I spend more time listening to them. I've got a bunch of things that I'm reviewing at this moment, so I haven't been able to spend the past 4 days just back to back nonstop listening to the Variations, but I will say that I'm pretty happy with it. The question is going to be, do I like it more than the Dusk and the Blessing 2, or how much more do I like it better than the Blessing 2 and the Dusk? Is it worth the extra $200? How does it compare to the Dunu EST 112? And those are the questions I will answer in the review. Non-Min finally caught me live. Nice to see you. Glad you can make it. David K, thanking me for the reviews. You're welcome. Thanks for watching. Oh, Sai was asking for a clarification on the Blonds. Are they made out of pure metal? As best I can tell, yes. These things are, I mean, I hesitate to say solid metal because they're obviously not solid, but as best I can tell, these things are completely metal. It does seem to be, you know, coated in some sort of something that makes it, I don't know anything about material science, so someone else tell me exactly how this thing is prepared, but it does seem to have some sort of coating, but I do think that underneath of it, the framing is metal as well. It's got a decent weight to it, you know, it's not an especially heavy IM, especially not in the ear or anything like that, but for there being an IM that is so hollow, it does still have plenty of weight to it that kind of confirms to me that it is quite made of metal. Kaede asking, if these are the Blon BL-03 upgrade, could you compare them to the Eco OH1S? Are they different tastes, or are the Eco still better bass IM? So one thing, I'm gonna have to make some assumptions about what you're asking, because the OH1S is a new IM that Eco just released, and you could also be asking about the OH1s. You might have just pluralized it, and I'm gonna assume the latter, because the OH1S is not a very bassy IM. The OH1, and those things cost around, I think the retail price is around $130, so they are a more expensive IM than the Blon. So just take that into consideration. And also take into consideration, I honestly have not heard, I've not listened to the OH1S or the OH1 in many years. It's been at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So my memory of that's gonna be pretty fuzzy. Based on memory, I want to say I like the OH1 better than the Prometheus, but couldn't even really tell you why, because it's been that long. What's up, Huron? Predicting 18 stars, that was a bold move. I don't want to say you were wrong, but it didn't seem accurate. Fabio Lopez ordered some days ago and already regret it. First of all, you might not regret it. Make up your own mind. Don't listen to me. I'm curious though, Fabio, if you've gotten it by now, and if you have any opinions about it. Because again, this is my take. My take is not everybody's take. My take is certainly not the right take or anything like that. It's just for my preference. I think these things are, they're okay. They're not bad, they're just okay. Sigh, in terms of mids, bass, Thea Audio Oracle or Blon A8. Well, I haven't heard the Oracle, so theoretically I can't answer that question, but I would be shocked if the Oracle wasn't better. It's also a $500 IM. Not that price equals sound quality, I've heard good things about the Oracle. Oh, Fabio, so you said that you own the Blon BL-03 and the Mini. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? You must like one of them at least to have led yourself into owning now 3 different Blon IMs. It's Andy saying these have mixed opinions from what I've seen so far. I do love the 03 and the 01. I think the bass is tighter and more refined on the 01, and the upper ranges are a bit more subdued than 03. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard the 01. I've heard the 03, the 05, and now the Prometheus. What's up, Jeremy and Kiros? Still trying to catch up with live chat. Yu-Gi-Oh! Asking, what's the natural upgrade to the S8 with the same tonality and sound signature? You're asking about what's an upgrade from the Moondrop S8? Can't really think of anything that has that same sound signature that sounds better. So I don't know. You might be stuck. See, some folks are a little surprised that I gave it 3 stars, saying that it seems too much. And I don't know. I mean, you make up your own mind. Again, I think that the build quality and the fit on these things is actually pretty solid. That goes a fair bit, fair way in my book. And then the sound is not offensive. Generally, when something is a 2, maybe let's talk a little bit about my scoring criteria, my own methodology, how I land on these numbers. To me, a 2 is something I would recommend someone not buy. Which is to say, if someone came to me and said, I'm thinking about the Blon A8 Prometheus, I might say, I wouldn't do that. Like, that's what a 2 means to me. A 3 means, okay, if you're looking for it, here are the things that you should know about it. It's not my favorite, but you might like it. All right, that's kind of how a 3 is to me, and that's how I feel about the Prometheus. It's not especially offensive. Again, like if it had really grating treble and it was hard to listen to, I would say, all right, it's a 2. Don't avoid it. But it's okay. Adam Mobius asking, how do you test or judge technical performance? And the true answer is you just make it up because nobody knows. No. Technical performance, right? It's just kind of a stand-in for a handful of characteristics that, to the best of my knowledge, we don't actually have the ability to measure. Like, I can't prove that, but it's your interpretation. And those characteristics, for me, a lot of it comes down to detail and definition and sort of like the how solid of a 3D image is the IM presenting. And under $100, honestly, my expectations are not super high. Frankly, none of these IMs I think are fantastic in terms of technicalities, but within the context of sub $100 IMs, I think the Aria is pretty solid. It's not as good as the Moondrop SSR, but that's another conversation entirely. But yeah, honestly, it's just, I listen to music that I think brings out that kind of stuff. And I talked about, the album Disintegration by The Cure being a pretty good album for very clearly illustrating how well or how good an IM is with busy music. Does it sound like just a wall of sound and this one-dimensional just kind of blob of audio? Or does it still sound like, you know, just bespoke instruments, each producing their own sound that are coming from their own sense of space? That's, to me, you know, ultimately the effect of what technicalities contributes to. Sai asking, Tin T5 or Blon A8? Interesting. I would probably go with the Tin T5 and just... The T5 treble is pretty harsh. But it actually does a pretty good job at, you know, that 3D sense of space. And there's basically, I would think I would take the T5 and just avoid certain music that's likely to be problematic. Suena tremendo. Hola. Next review, drinking mate, please. Maybe. What if I made a mess? What if I just spilled mate all over the table? It's very likely. And I've got water here. This is dangerous enough. And it's not scalding hot. JCap, I see you having issues with Keep Hi-Fi. I would say, you know, contact customer support and hopefully they'll be good to you. I've honestly, I don't think I've bought anything from Keep Hi-Fi yet at this point. I bought things from most of the major IM retailers, but Keep Hi-Fi is a new one for me. So I haven't had any personal experience with them. And usually when I buy from these, you know, I get a lot of stuff sent to me for free for review, obviously. But there are times when I buy stuff for myself. And when I do, like, I don't call it, like, I don't even order it from my same address. Like, I try to be as much of a normal consumer, I guess is what I'm trying to say, as possible, and try not to come at them as the guy that does super review. Sai, I will compare the variations to the Dusk in the review for sure. I think the main comparisons in the variations review are going to be the Dusk, the Blessing 2, and the EST-112. I'll probably also mention a little bit the Moondrop S8, because that's kind of like, if you're looking at the price hierarchy, the S8 would be like the next step up. But I think those three are going to be more where the comparisons are going to focus. Rob Hawk, what is my favorite IEM that I haven't talked about much yet? Interesting. I don't know if I have one. I mean, the Moondrop S8 is one I listen to a lot. The Moondrop SSR and the Stardust are ones that I honestly still listen to quite a bit, even though I don't have to. The Moondrop Blessing 2 I listen to a lot. Wow, I'm a Moondrop stan. Yeah, I don't know. The EST-112, I like that one quite a bit too. Unstable, how's it going? Nice to see you. Quantum Creator, how you doing? Nuno Vasco Costa saying, great review, a little disappointed with the 3 stars. Apologies for that. Yeah, I mean, again, if you got this IM and you like it, seriously, do not ignore my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter to you. I'm not here to make some assertion about the objective quality of the Blon Prometheus. This is just my take. I think it's a decent IM that, frankly, I probably will not be listening to after this review. Unstable asking, do I ever feel the holes in the ear? Oh, are you asking about the holes on, I thought you were talking about the holes on my head. These things, no, honestly, I felt that comfort-wise, these things were very solid. I didn't have any issues with feeling like edges or anything from this odd design, which is certainly a risk. I think that they did a pretty good job of making everything, all the edges nice and smooth, to the point that in my ear it felt perfectly normal and comfortable. Lorvold asking, am I going to review the The Audio Legacy 2? I think so, but I'm not certain. I think I have a Legacy 2 on the way. Darkness Deep saying, for those who enjoy quality and definition for use on buses to work, recommend the Blon. If not, then what recommend? I mean, I think, look in this comparison, in this price range around 80 to 100 bucks, I think the Moondrop Aria is pretty hard to beat. If you're in an area where you can get it, the Etymotic ER2XR is very often sold for under $100, and that is unbelievable value. I didn't bring that comparison up here because a couple of reasons. One, its MSRP is actually much higher than that. It's just been super discounted, so it's kind of not fair to compare, but if you're actually making that shopping choice and it's available to you, it's kind of hard to not say get the ER2. The only caveat there is you're going to have to get used to fitting with Etymotics, which takes some getting used to, but I think you can do it. Jacqueline Dawkins saying, listening to this with my 10T2 Plus. Just got on, I'm late. Maybe I'm petty, but the design of the A8 is a bit off for me. Yeah, like I was saying, I feel like the design on this thing is pretty polarizing. I fall into the camp of, I think it looks cool. I'm glad Blon did this. But some people have definitely said, you know, even at the beginning of this review, I think, or before the review started, Kaede was chiming in saying it looked very alien, which I get it. It looks a little alien. But yeah. Curious, Jacqueline, which of the, so now that you have the Prometheus and the 10T2 Plus, which one do you prefer? I personally would pick the T2 Plus. Bradford saying, looks like I'll be sticking with the Blon BL-03 a bit longer, going by this review. Do you have a favorite DD set, dynamic driver set? And that is, I mean, favorite dynamic driver. Honestly, the one that I listen to the most, still the Moondrop SSR, which, yeah, the Moondrop, it's that good. If you like that tonality, the SSR is really, really solid. If you want to go quite a bit up in price, I think something like the, well, let's see, the Tanchjim Hana is a pretty solid single dynamic driver set. The Tanchjim Oxygen, JVC FDX1, very solid single dynamic driver IM. Trying to think of anything else that's at the top of my mind, but no, I think those are kind of my favorites at this point. At least under, you know, 200 bucks. Kalmat, greetings from Malaysia. Greetings, nice to see you. Oh, and Jacqueline, appreciate the congrats. And glad and nice to see you back again too. Retro asking, what music do I use to test IM? So it's a bunch of stuff generally, but if you're curious about it, like really curious about it, you can check out the channel and the playlist tab. I have a playlist of reference music. So just a bunch of different music that I think is pretty good for testing headphones, and it's stuff that I tend to use. Lately, it's been a lot of, you know, like Men I Trust, listen to some Sublime. The Cure's, I think, a really good album for testing. Even also lately been listening to Smashing Pumpkins' Gish album. For some reason, the rest of Smashing Pumpkins albums, they're kind of mediocre productions, but Gish is really nice. Especially the song Suffer. Like, that's a good song. and it sounds good on a good set. Terry Meyer saying, I really like the sound of my Blon A8s. What would you recommend for an upgrade in the $200 to $300 range that would take me to the next level? It's a little bit hard, honestly, because I can't think of a lot of IEMs in that price range. I can't really think of a lot of IEMs in general that have that same sound signature. The BL-03 being this very warm, full, kind of lush, almost like, I almost want to describe it as this really full, kind of bassy version of neutral, but yeah, I don't know. I can't really think of anything else, honestly, that has that exact same sound signature. That said, if you like the bass quantity of it, maybe you would be pretty happy with something like the Tantrum Oxygen. Also a very bassy single dynamic driver IEM. Costs around $250 maybe. And that's just going to give you just like a really next step up in terms of imaging quality and soundstage, which is a word I don't really use a lot, but it's pretty easy to describe the Oxygen as being a bigger soundstage than something like the O3. Simon asking which €100 IEM would I recommend for an HD 600 lover, and I would go back to the ER2XR. Yeah, you mentioned the Starfields in the ER2XR. I'd highly recommend the ER2XR. Especially if you can add, the Etymotic makes basically different filters that you can swap in and out of the nozzle of the ER2. All of their IEMs actually. And I found that the ER2XR sounds even better, particularly good if you swap in a brown filter. So if you get an ER2XR with a brown filter, Bradford saying, not related to the A8, but I noticed your graphing tool, the new XM4 still seems kind of warm, dark, even with your EQ. Is that by choice or is it just a limitation of the driver? So good question. Could be a couple of things. I'll start with a thing that I mentioned in my review of the XM4s is that usually when I EQ something to make it sound more like what I like it to sound like, I don't like erasing the character of the IEM, if that makes sense. So, for example, I spent some time, playing with parametric EQ on the Moondrop SSR, and my goal was not to make it sound or not like an SSR, I guess, which is another way of saying that. Like, I still want it to sound like an SSR, which it has the very characteristic, very forward upper mid-range, which you would think if I'm trying to make that thing sound totally neutral, I would just take that upper mid-range and really pull it back. But that was like a character of the sound that I wanted to preserve, so I didn't really get rid of that. And kind of a similar thing with the XM4. It is a warm, full, nice mid-range, dark, downward tilted frequency response. And the part of that I wanted to preserve was that full lower mid-range with the nice present bass. So I didn't overdo, at least in my opinion, I didn't overdo the raising of the upper mid-range and the treble. Now, the second potential answer to that question is that it might actually be brighter than it measures. So another IEM reviewer, Bambu, he measured the XM4s as well, and he found that the EQ differences he was making, or especially with the presets, the differences in the EQ are much stronger than what I was getting in my frequency response graphs. And the hypothesis was that he was measuring them at like half volume and I was measuring them at full volume. And the hypothesis is that when you're listening to the IEM at full volume, which I don't listen to it at that volume, I just did that for testing. The hypothesis is that when they're playing at full volume, basically the degree of change from the EQ sort of gets neutered a little bit. So let's say if I'm listening at half volume and I listen to it with a treble boost, let's say it's plus 10 decibels of treble. Maybe if I have that thing playing at full volume into a measurement microphone, it might actually be plus 5 decibels. So it's possible that my measurements didn't actually pick up the full extent of the change. Which way is it? I don't know. I could probably spend a lot more time playing around with the measurements and stuff like that, but didn't sound very fun. Leave that one a mystery. Precog saying Annihilator. Do you think the Annihilator is a good upgrade from the Blon BL-03? The Annihilator, it was like a $3,500 IM, something like that. Yeah, so an order of magnitude, a couple orders of magnitude higher than the Blon. Fabio Lopez saying the one dynamic driver NA2, which is the NF Audio IM I just unboxed recently. Fabio Lopez saying it's incredible. And that is a review that will be coming up pretty soon. I've been playing around with actually putting different filters on the nozzle of it, and I actually have some measurements, I think, on squig.link if you're interested in checking those out. Yeah, Nagihano asking, where is the Ibeso ITO1X review? And Precog, I see you jumping in there with an answer. The IM that I got, that I unboxed, there's some problem with it. I'm not sure exactly what the problem is. It's definitely a pretty significant channel imbalance that I can measure, but it feels like when I'm listening to it, it feels like I'm listening to two completely different IMs, like at different volume levels, and like I feel like the difference that I'm hearing is even more significant than the difference in the frequency response. So there's some problem. I think I've got a new one on the way, but I don't feel good about reviewing a product that's obviously got a fault. And look, faults happen. I'm not going to review the IM and say, oh, the Ibeso sucks because I got a bad model. That's not a fair review. I mean, if I got like 5 of them and they all had the same problem, okay, you can make that a pretty fair review, but it just seems like it's a manufacturing defect, so I'm not going to review that one. When the new one comes in, if it comes in, I'll give that one another shot. Omar asking, have I heard of V-Moda headphones? I've heard that they have very good sound quality. I had a friend that bought, I don't even remember which model it was. It was some DJ headphone. I wish I remembered the name. It was Master something. I don't know. Does that sound like a V-Moda model? And I heard that briefly over at his house, and I didn't think it was I was not very impressed with it. I thought it was very overpriced. But it was a closed back headphone. Like, I guess I'm just very rarely impressed by closed backs, I guess, is one way to say that too. But I was not very impressed with the V-Moda that I heard. Oh, Precog, you're saying the 64 Audio Neo is a BL-03 flagship upgrade. Yeah, the Neo is very much that bass, very full bass, very mid-bassy. And I would say it does sound better than the BL-03, but $2,000 for the Neo is a little bit much. And Chris Stroud saying, I really love the A8, the Blon A8. Definitely recommend them in my opinion. So there you go, another take. Iman asking, what's the best filter for the ER4 XR? I haven't actually played around with filters on the ER4 XR. I'm pretty happy with the stock tuning, and mostly what the filters seem to do is affect sort of the upper mid-range and lower treble. And I feel like that part of the Etymotic ER4 XR is pretty much bang on for my preferences. I wish, the ER4 XR imaged better, but I don't think swapping out the filter is going to change that. So I have not played with the filters there. And Simon asking, are the ER2 XRs really that much better than the Starfield? And it's like all things, it really is a matter of preference. For my preference, yes. I don't know, I could probably be pretty happy just listening to the ER2 XR and nothing else. The Starfield, it's fine. It's good. It's a good set. Saying it's fine is an understatement. It's just, I find it a little bit boring. Oh, Grand Patala listening to Gish now. All right. Yeah, I think the tracks suffer. Like, it's just got this really nice deep bass in it, and it's got some nice percussion in it. It's subtle. but pretty enjoyable. Das Ninja Stick saying, not sure I understand the Blon's naming conventions. I think that's a fair point. Look, let's go back to this box. This is the BL-A8. And then what is this? The Wigson Blon? Like huh? Is that better than Opity? I'm not sure what's going on. But okay. State asking what's the Legacy 2 configuration. I believe it's a single dynamic driver and a single BA. So as the 2 implies, it's a 2-driver IM and it's still a hybrid. Chef Steve asking what's the best tips for the Blon BL-03. I think I've actually got the stock tips on my 03. Like, they're fine for me. They're not the best tips. If I was in love with the BL-03 and listening to it all the time, I would probably customize it with something like, I don't know, the final E-types or something like that, but I haven't actually tried it because I thought the stock tips were fine, and for the amount that I've listened to it, I just left them on it. Non-Min asking, I'm tempted to go no filter. Should I? Are you talking about the Etymotics? Because that's what we were talking about, filters. I recommend probably not. That's probably a bad idea, but I don't know. And Chad Williams, sorry if it's been asked, better tonality, the Blon BL-03 or the Prometheus. I actually ranked them specifically on tonality. And in that, I ranked the Blon BL-03 higher than the Prometheus for my preferences. State, yes, I do believe the Harmonic Dyne PD1 is on the way for review. All right, folks, I think that's going to do it. It's almost 6 o'clock. Probably got to start making dinner soon. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the conversation, for the chat. That was the Blon A8 Prometheus. If you're interested in checking this thing out, again, check the link in the description down below to Keep Hi-Fi. And again, shout out to them. Thanks for sending it in for review. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell thingy, and then I'll catch you in the next super review. Have a good one.